which Jewish tradition treats with such tremendous respect. And there are many traditions and laws that apply the way we respect and treat a human body. I can surely speak for all the rabbis on this call that we always speak with people who have to make end-of-life decisions. And many people, for no fault of their own, haven't had the benefit of an education on what Jewish tradition has to say about this topic and the beautiful view and viewpoint of Judaism. And so it's such a special honor tonight to be able to, all of us, host this conversation. And our special guest is Rabbi Doron Kornbluth, who is up very late in the night in Israel. And so it's 2 a.m. in Israel now. And it's such an honor. And we're so happy that we're able to welcome Doron, who's going to talk. And he will talk for a little while. And then I'll ask you if you have a question, just to post it into the chat. And Doron, even though it's in the middle of the night, he promised us to stay as long as he can to answer everybody's individual questions. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Rabbi Doron Kornbluth.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Pleasure and an honor to be with you. Please give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly. Okay, great. I have a couple screens here. That's how we're going to work. Zoom can be really interactive if you do it right, so we're going to try. It's a pleasure. It is late in the night here in Israel. That being said, I have an advantage over you, which is that I actually had a nap already, so I'm doing fine. And I have coffee, so I'm doing really good. And we're going to spend some time together. I look forward to it. When I talk about this subject, I sometimes think of a story that I heard. The story is about this elderly gentleman, and he's laying in bed, and he calls over his wife. And he says, "Honey, come sit with me on the bed." So she sits with him on the bed, kind of curious what's going on. He says, "Honey, do you remember when we were in our 20s and I broke my leg and you were there?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And do you remember when I was in my 40s and I had my heart attack and you were there?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And do you remember in my 50s when I went bankrupt and you were there?" "Yes, honey, I was." So he says, "My darling, I have something to share with you." And tear comes in her eye and she leans into him and he says, "Honey, you're bad luck." So there are some subjects that really seem like bad luck, taboo. People don't want to talk about them. People don't want to, don't want to go there. And this is one of those topics. So I want to thank you, Rabbi and rabbis. I've been in touch with Rabbi Wolf, and for all of you rabbis for hosting, and thank all of you, wonderful people in all these different places, for coming together to talk about it, because it is important to have some information and to have some preparation and to understand. Some societies we know historically were very into death. As far as we can tell, archaeologically, historically, we don't know for sure, but the Egyptians had a book of the dead. The Tibetans, ancient Tibetans, had a book of the dead. The pyramids were filled with material to take into the afterlife. It seems to us, historically, like their societies were death-focused. Today, Western society is quite the opposite in many ways. There's a denial of death in certain ways, taboo, unimportant. People don't talk about it, don't want to go there. And by the way, even Judaism has a hint of this. How does a Jew say, what does a Jew say when we have a drink? L'chaim, to life. In other words, we don't overfocus on death. There is something after, we know that, and it's important, it's the crucial to everything, but we focus on life. I'm here, God put me here to fix myself, to change myself, and to fix the world, to bring godliness and goodness into the world. I'm not supposed to be thinking too much about the afterlife. That being said, there are disadvantages to not talking about it, which is that sometimes you just don't know what choices to make. Woody Allen once said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying." Meaning that, what's what are we actually thinking about over here? So we may not want to talk about it. It's not so comfortable. Interestingly, the Torah, the Bible, talks about it a lot. Abraham buries Sarah. Abraham is buried. Rachel is buried. Jacob is buried. It's a lot of ink on the subject. So it's interesting that throughout all of history, Jews and Judaism insisted on burial. This was the norm, with very few exceptions. Roman historian Tacitus, when he described the Jews to his compatriots, in those few paragraphs, one of the few things that he said, was that the Jews bury rather than burn the dead. It stood out. Cremation is not a new thing. It's existed for thousands of years. Archaeological remains all over the world from all societies. And yet it stood out. Jews always buried the dead. When a new Jewish community is formed, what do? They're supposed to build a school, a mikveh, and set up a chevra kadisha, the burial society. So until recently, this was the norm. Very few Jews historically ever chose cremation. We know the Nazis did it to the victims, but very few Jews chose cremation until recently. Now, the overall American national average, Jews and non-Jews, is over 50%. Over 50% of American citizens who die are choosing cremation. Jews are not that far behind. It's hard to know exactly. Certainly, it's 1 out of 3 by now. In some places, it's higher, and it's going up. So the question is, and for this, we have the wonderful chat function at the bottom of your screen. I want to see what you think. Why have things changed? Forget about Jews for a second, but Jews, non-Jews, doesn't matter, it can be both. Why are people today, Jews and non-Jews, choosing cremation more than ever before in our lifetimes? What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Let me see your answers. Why are people today? So Jeffrey is saying saving money. Jim is saying simplicity. Absolutely, keep going. This is great. Too expensive, cheaper, takes up less real estate, says Sherry. Very good. You guys are hitting all the big ones right away. This is great. Educated crowd. I'm impressed. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Loved ones, take them with them in an urn. Mobility, good. Environmentalism, everyone does it. This is great, guys. You don't really need me. You've got all the reasons. No, I'm just kidding. So like this. We have now seen a list, and I think you've gotten almost all the main ones, a list of the reasons that people today, Jews and non-Jews, are choosing cremation. So I want to go through these reasons, and I want to analyze them very briefly. We'll see which are valid and which are not. And then we're going to flip over the discussion and talk about why burial. Understand that structure? First, we're going to discuss why people are cremating, analyze those reasons one by one. As we will discover, some of them are valid, some of them are not. And then we're going to flip to the why burial side. Okay, so the first thing that was mentioned was cost. Let's leave that to the end, the financial issues. Let's leave that to the end. Environmentalism. There were two or three mentions of environmentalism. I'm very eco-conscious, and it means a lot to me, and I grew up this way. And I mean, you know, it's part of our culture now, thank God. And there are serious, significant environmental critiques of burial. One has to do with what's put into the land, and one has to do with the land itself. Let's deal with the latter one first, meaning the use of land. The phrase that cremation societies often use. Personally, I have a pet peeve. I don't like the fact that they call themselves cremation societies. It's a for-profit business. It's $1 billion industry, cremation. Society implies nonprofit, but okay, let's forget that for a second. Cremation societies use the phrase, land is for the living. Has anybody heard that phrase? Land is for the living? I see some people are nodding, meaning it's a moral argument. The argument is that if you are a good person, You would not want your body to waste valuable land. After all, there's a limited amount of land on the planet. There is a growing population. So a good person wouldn't waste it on the dead. Land is for the living. Very powerful argument, actually. The only problem is I ran the numbers. I did the math. And here's how it turns out. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of stats. I'll give you some resources later for those who want some more information, resources. But it's like this. If every American who died, that's just under 3 million a year, meaning Western societies have a death rate of just under 1%. Meaning that if you have in the United States of America right now, you have 340 or something million Americans, you'll have just under 3 million deaths a year. And thank God there's more births and immigration, so populations go up. But that's how many people die roughly in most Western countries. So if every American that died were to be buried, get this stat, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's land mass. Do you get that stat? If every American who died, and I'm only talking to Jews, less than 2% of the population, but if every American who died were to be buried, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's land mass. True, if you want to be buried in downtown Manhattan, you have a problem. There isn't any room. But how often do you go to a cemetery anyway? Within 30 minutes or 60 minutes of every urban area that I've ever been to or heard of, there's plenty of land. There's only 3 places in the world that I know of that actually do have a land problem. Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and there are solutions, by the way. But North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, there is a ton of land all over. By the way, we use more land every year for new Walmarts than we do for burials. So theoretically, if we had to make a choice between land is for the living and land is for the dead, I hear the point. But there's no choice that needs to be made. There's a tremendous amount of land available. Half an hour out of town. If you doubt me, by the way, I'll give you resources later. But next time you go on a plane, when COVID is hopefully over and we're allowed to fly again, look down. There's a ton of land everywhere. There's plenty, there's no issue. The second environmental claim about burial and cremation is actually much more significant because it's much more real. And it points to 2 factors that are huge environmental concerns for burial. And it goes like this. See if you notice, I'm seeing something weird on the screen. Okay, good. See if you notice what the commonality is between these 2 factors. I'm going to share 2 factors about burial. They seem disconnected, but there's one commonality between them. Rabbis, you are not allowed to answer this question. Ladies and gentlemen, use the chat function. The 2 factors are, 1, metal caskets. We put Golden Gate Bridge after Golden Gate Bridge into the ground for metal caskets. Tremendous amount of metal, producing the metal, all the electricity, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're put into the ground and they rust over hundreds of years. It's terrible for the environment, legitimately really bad for the environment. The other factor is embalming. Forgive me, I'm going to try not to be gross, but there's a couple of things about burial and cremation that we just have to say. So embalming, most common in the United States of America compared to other countries, but it is the norm for many people, that they remove the liquids, blood essentially, from the body, replace it with preservatives. Formaldehyde is the #1 historically and is still used in many cases. It's essentially for viewing. It delays the decomposition of the body. It doesn't prevent it. The body still decomposes. It just takes a little longer. A tremendous amount of toxic chemicals going into liters and gallons going into the ground with every burial. Right? Very bad for the environment. What's put into the ground? Metal and the toxic chemicals of embalming. Ladies and gents, what's the commonality between these two things? What does embalming have to be? What is the commonality between embalming and metal caskets? Well, I'll save you. Bad for the environment. I know, I just said it. Thank you, Stuart. Beth got it right away. Same with Jonathan. Okay, Sam, good. You guys got it. Neither are Jewish. Both are forbidden by the Jewish tradition. We insist on simple wood caskets, pine, etc. In Israel, by the way, where I am, we do not use caskets at all. They use a casket to carry the body, but when it's put into the ground, it's in simple burial shrouds, talus in some cases, right? And in most countries or cities, you have to use a casket. So you use a casket, simple wood casket, and embalming is considered a desecration of the body of the deceased. We don't mess with that. So Jewish burial has always been a model of environmentalism. When you ask environmentalists, and I'll give you resources later, or we can talk about it, what are they in favor of? They are not in favor of cremation. Cremation uses a tremendous amount of fossil fuels. We're switching our cars to electric cars, and suddenly we're using all this electricity for fossil fuels, for cremations. Many municipalities have rules about not having crematorium beside schools. Why? Because they release toxic chemicals into the air. The number one thing being mercury, replacement teeth fillings, right? It's out of phase now, but most of us at our ages and older have. So what environmentalists are in favor of is called green burial. Green burial is made, there's a lot of factors, but the main two components of green burial, no embalming, no metal caskets. We're a model of it. Okay, next subject that people raised was the mobility issue. It's said in different ways. The mobility issue is fascinating. In the old country, so to speak, nostalgia, there was a family plot, generation after generation after generation, and people could easily visit the grave and would visit the graves. I'm from Montreal, Canada originally. And when I go to Montreal, I try, before COVID, I was going every, 3, 4, 6, speaking tours, pretty often. So I get to the States and Canada pretty often. And I was going to, I would say every 3 times a year, twice a year, something like that, to visit my parents. And I would go to the cemetery, except in the dead of winter when it's all ice and snow there, I couldn't get in. But otherwise, and there's a family plot. It's a beautiful thing. But today, that doesn't really happen. The grandparents are in one city. The next generation's in another city. The next generation's in another city. So where's the grave going to be? Florida actually has a relatively high cremation rate. And one of the explanations is there's so many retirees. So where am I going to be buried? Here in Florida, everybody I know is gone or going to be gone soon. Back in New York, I haven't lived there for 30 years. Out where my kids live in LA, who knows how long they're going to be there? I don't know anybody there. So people say, quite reasonably, no one's ever going to visit my grave. So why bother having one? Wouldn't it be better to just take the remains with me? With not me, but with the kids. It's a good argument, actually. It's a good point. People are reasonable. This is not a talk about Jewish guilt. Where people make decisions based on the best information they have. So we have to answer the questions. If you decided to or didn't decide to, or if somebody in your family was cremated, now is not the time to feel guilty, and this is not a guilt trip of any kind. We're not like, it's not Yom Kippur. You did what you thought was right. We're going to share some information, and I think there's other ways of looking at it. Give a donation in the memory of that person. To the local Chabad. They didn't ask me to say that, but it's worth it. And move on. So I'm just pointing out people are reasonable. So it's a reasonable point about visiting the grave. But I want to think about it in a new way. I'm going to test your Jewish knowledge. So get ready to use the chat function. Rabbis, you are not allowed to answer this question. You better know the answer, but you're not allowed to answer this question. So a preamble to the question is that my side job is a tour guide here in Israel, before COVID at least. I would do a couple things. I would travel around the world speaking to communities, and I take people around Israel. So when it ends, if you want to be in touch and have me tour with you around Israel, I'm glad to. So this is a true or false. I actually wrote a book on the subject. I'll give a little plug. It's a gorgeous book with a coffee table Israel pro-Jewish book. I did it with a photographer, gorgeous photos. True or false? The biggest chapter of this book is when I take people to visit the grave of Moses. True or false? My favorite place in the biggest chapter is when I take people to visit the grave of Moses in Israel. Tell me, raise your hands, right? Or give me a thumbs up. Do you think that's true? That I take people to the grave of Moses in Israel? True or false? True or false? Wow, I get such some people are saying no. Wow, Jonathan, you're saying no, right? I see a lot of people. So ladies and gents, it's not true. It's a great book, but Moses' grave doesn't appear in the book. And I never go there. Why? There's two ways that you know that it's false. Number one, Moses never made it into Israel. We can hop on a plane in normal times. We can hop on a plane. The verses say that he hit the rock instead of talking to the rock. Commentators disagree what the real, problem was, but his fondest dream, his biggest desire to enter the land of Israel wasn't allowed. Number two reason, we don't know where his grave is. He was so holy, and his prophecy was at such a level that God knew it would become a place of idol worship. So God, and it's clear in the Torah, God hid the place of his burial. Now here's my question. He most certainly has a grave, but nobody's ever been there. Has anyone ever visited the grave of Moses? No, that's the point. And yet, archaeologically, we know that at that time in history, just over 3,000 years ago, there was certainly cremation. It was the norm, actually, archaeologically. Yet God did not choose to cremate. Because we, in our modern minds, we connect two things that actually shouldn't be connected. We connect having a grave with visiting a grave. And we think if no one's going to visit, then why bother having one? Well, Judaism looks at it quite differently. Moses himself, they are two completely separate issues. If you connect to visiting to a grave, I do. I like visiting graves, actually. I'm not a weirdo. I don't go every day. Don't worry. There's no obligation to go. There's nothing in the Torah. You have to go. If you connect to it, wonderful. If you don't, fine. But that has nothing to do with having a grave. As we're going to see, the body, the soul, deserve the grave, even if nobody's going to visit it, just like Moses, as an example. The flip side of the issue is the idea of taking the cremated remains, sometimes called the cremains, with you, passing on. So I'm going to give an example. Judy was the daughter. She was closest to the parents, so she gets the two urns. But eventually, years pass and they're moving out of the house that they raised the kids in, moving into an apartment. There's no real room, so she passes the urns on to the next generation. So the first generation has 2 urns. The next generation has 4 urns. The next generation has You get the point, everybody? Our homes and our lives are simply not meant for the long-term respectful care of cremated remains. It doesn't happen. At some point, they're disposed of in some way, respectful or not. You may have a kid, a grandkid, a great-grandkid, or 100 years later, some descendant that connects to tradition a little more, looks for their ancestors, their connection, wants to visit people they knew or they didn't know. But even if you don't, having a grave and visiting are 2 completely separate ideas. So cremation doesn't solve mobility problems, just postpones them by a generation. And having a grave is important even if nobody will visit it. Some of the other reasons that were mentioned that people are choosing cremation is that it's kind of like gross to think about decomposition. I mean, let's be honest, the body composing underground is not pleasant. Well, ladies and gents, this is a talk on burial and cremation, so I'm sure you were expecting a little bit of uncomfortable stuff. That's going to be the next 30 seconds. So, turn off your sound if you don't want to hear this, and then turn back on in 30 seconds. Cremations are not pleasant. They are not quick. That was my biggest surprise when I started researching this subject. I was not always into this subject. 10 years ago, I knew nothing about it. I was on a speaking tour, and my main subjects that I used to speak about, and I still speak about, I wrote a book called Why Be Jewish, and I speak about that to all different generations. I wrote a book called Raising Kids to Love Being Jewish. I speak to parents and grandparents. I keep their families Jewish, and I travel around the world, and I speak a lot of different, I give talks on marriage and raising kids, but all this kind of positive, relationship and positive Jewish identity stuff. And I was on a speaking tour in Florida about 10 years ago, a number of Chabads actually at the time, as I remember. And I opened up the Jewish newspaper, and in the Jewish newspaper, there was an advertisement from a Jewish funeral home offering Jewish cremations. And I was in shock because I'm a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal. I didn't know there was such a thing as Jewish cremation. I always thought there were certain things that, some are more observant, less observant, but we're all Jews. There's certain things growing up that all Jews did. We know that Jews don't eat pig, don't pitch on Yom Kippur, and don't pay retail. There's certain things Jews do. We don't cremate, right? So obviously it changed. And so I started researching when I saw this. And I spent about 3 years in deep research on the subject. I read everything you can possibly read on the subject, in several languages, actually. I read French because I'm from Canada, and my Hebrew, whatever. I did everything I could. I met with funeral home directors all around the world. I got the plans for the ovens, the electric plans, the environmental concerns. I did many research. The result was the book that you heard about, in the book on the subject that I wrote, Cremation or Burial: A Jewish View, from Mosaica Press. And I want to share with you now the biggest surprise that I had in my research. When I was still talking, only about Jewish identity, things like that, and I got into this subject, I always thought, and maybe you think this, I don't know, I always thought that cremation was something like my microwave oven. Forgive me, but put the thing in, press the button, 5 minutes later, it's done. Quick, clean. Sorry, guys. It's not quick, and it's not clean. Typical cremation of a thin person, like I used to be before Corona. I put on like 15 pounds. That's terrible. So typical cremation lasts 90 minutes to 2 hours. For a bigger person like me, it's closer to 3 hours. For people who are obese, it can be up to 4 hours. During that time in the oven, the body is not still and calm. The muscles are expanding and contracting. The body is moving. The brain is sizzling. It is a disgusting, violent procedure. It's gross. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim to you that decomposition underground, the Jewish way, is pleasant. Of course not. But I will tell you that both are pretty gross. And get this, one is the natural way of every living thing. A plant grows, blossoms, and goes back to the ground. An animal is born, runs around the forest, lays down, and goes back to the ground. Burial is the natural way of every living thing. Cremation is a man-made, artificial, last grasp at control. It's fascinating. Cremation societies use this image. I've seen it many times. There's a woman on the beach walking with her elderly mother. It's sunset imagery, end of life. There's a dolphin, in the water. The image is nature. Well, burial is the natural way. Cremation is not. So decomposition, environmental reasons. Some people mentioned secularization, meaning the less traditional you are, the less traditional things you do. It's definitional, right? I'm not sure if that's the reason to make big life decisions. You tell me. It's become a fad in recent years, actually, cremation. I'm not wearing a tie now. We're all amongst friends. On Friday nights, on Shabbat nights, I try and wear a tie. And my kids are always complaining about my ties. I forget if my ties are too wide. I think they're too wide now. Yeah, they're too wide, right? So, and they want me to get rid of my wide ties because it's not the fad, right? So I'm not getting rid of my wide ties because you and I both know that in 5 years, they'll be back in, right? The ties come, the ties go, the fads come. That's how you're going to choose what to do with your body because of what happens to be popular at the moment? I mean, let's be real. When you get into the reasons that people choose cremation, I think we went through all or most of your list. We can talk about if we missed anything. When you go through those reasons one by one, it turns out that with one notable exception, all those reasons are based on misinformation. Burial and cremation, people misunderstand it. Cremation is not better for the environment. It doesn't solve mobility problems. It's not quick and clean. Everything falls away. All the reasons for cremation that you listed, that people talk about today, are simply not true, except one. There is one reason for cremation. I'm fully transparent. There's one reason for cremation that actually is true. What is it? Money. At the end of the day, in most cases, not all cases, you can have an expensive cremation and you can have a cheap burial. By the way, I have never heard of someone who couldn't afford it who had to be cremated. The Jewish community is wonderful about that. Just for your information, and I can send you more information later, there are Jewish cemeteries, low-cost Jewish places of burial, ones in New York, free Hebrew burial. There's a whole place in Florida. You talk to your local Chabad rabbi, people who need the help, it can be arranged. But for most people, at the end of the day, burials are more expensive, sometimes $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 more expensive than a cremation. That's the norm. There's exceptions to that, but that's the norm. So until now, we've talked about cremation and the misinformation, the misconceptions that people have. Cremation is not better for the environment, doesn't solve mobility problems, blah, 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 blah. But now we have to flip it and say, okay, why is burial worth the extra money? I'm going to make a case that it is. There are some things in life that are worth a little extra. Gentlemen, when you bought an engagement ring for your beloved, I assume you did not get a plastic one from the bottom of a Cracker Jack box, right? Meaning that some things are worth a little extra money. My claim is this is worth it. If you plan it early, and I'm a big proponent of pre-planning, prepaying, prearranging. You write out the form. You have to know that, God willing, we'll all live nice, long, healthy lives. But when it comes, they phone the rabbi, the Chabad rabbi. He's in charge of everything. Make sure it's done right? No arguments amongst kids and grandkids, what to do, where to do, how to do. It gets stressful, and you don't want any problems at that time. It's all arranged. So I want to make a case that, if you do it early, by the way, the difference in money is not huge. It's like going to Starbucks once a week. I mean, it's not, when you add up that money, it's not that big a difference in the long term. But, if you leave it to the end, it's an extra few $1,000s. So the question is, why is it worth it? I'm going to give you a number of reasons. I want to move quickly so that we have time for questions and comments. Number one, in the Kovno ghetto during World War II, there was a rabbi. His name was Rabbi Ephraim Oshry. He tells a story of, he's in the ghetto, and at one point, a Nazi SS officer barges in, blonde hair, blue eyes. The rabbi thinks that he's about to die. The Nazi officer slams the door behind him and starts speaking to him in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. I looked the part. This is how I've survived the war. I'm not doing anything bad, God forbid. I push papers in the back. This is how I've made it through the war. But I'm a very sick man, and I only have a few weeks left. And I know what they're going to do. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over me, surrounded by Nazis. Rabbi, there's only one way I think I can get out of it. For a couple of years to survive, this is what I did. I can't be there for eternity. Can I be cremated in order to avoid the fate of being buried in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body forever? And Rabbi Oshry responded to him, my dear, dear child, no, you can't. If they do it to us, World War II, we have no choice. God will take care of things. But a Jew must do everything they can to avoid cremation. And he brought verses and Talmudic references, Maimonides. By the way, the verse itself we're gonna read very soon. the base verse we're going to read very soon in the Torah, Deuteronomy 21:22. Starts there and goes to 23 for those who are interested. It's the radical case of someone who's put to death in Judaism. I'll read you the verse. If a man shall have committed a sin whose judgment is death, he shall be put to death, and you shall hang him on the gallows. His body shall not remain for the night in the gallows. Rather, you shall surely bury him. The death penalty in Judaism is very rare. It's a theoretical deterrent measure for most of history. The Talmud says that if a court puts someone to death once in 70 years, right, that is a bloodthirsty court, meaning it's too much. And yet, in the case that someone is put to death, even in that case, take him down and bury him. All the more so, regular people. It's in the Talmud, it's in Maimonides, it's in the Code of Jewish Law, it goes straight through. This is a core part of our religion. If I were creating a religion, I don't know if I would make this as a core part of our religion, but it is. That's the first reason. By the way, this is filtered down into Jewish culture. I'm here in Israel. You've probably heard about the trades that the state of Israel has made to get captives, right? And it's very controversial, actually. I'm sure you know the name Gilad Shalit, the poor young guy who was in Hamas captivity for 5 years. They made a big trade, a couple thousand terrorists, and it was very controversial. Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? A lot of them were caught for doing new terrorist acts. So it's arguable on both sides. You want to save them. You don't want to. You know, the state of Israel actually, on numerous occasions, has traded live terrorists to get people's bodies back, people we knew who were dead. You can argue if that's correct or not correct, but the fact is we do it because proper burial is such a part of Judaism. Second reason, anybody know, God forbid, anybody passes. Anybody know what happens when a relative passes? One of the 7 relatives, mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, spouse. We tear kriya. You've heard that phrase? Take your outer jacket, outer garment, outer dress, tearing kriya. Tearing kriya is a double phrase, by the way. Kriya means tearing. It's one of those phrases like tearing kriya. So, by the way, I don't know if you've seen this in your communities where you are, but there's a modern thing that some people are doing where they're just putting a ribbon in their clothing and like cutting the ribbon. It's a very nice sentiment. It's a beautiful sentiment. Just so you know, that's actually not the idea. The whole point is that you're tearing your clothing. It's a rip. It's a serious thing. It's in my clothing. It's not just a ribbon. So just to let you know why the tradition is like that. So imagine the following image. When a person dies, the planet, Mother Earth, the world, tears kriya. It's an amazing image, actually. There's a rip in the ground. A hole is opened up. A gaping wound. It hurts. We can't go on. It's not normal. Then slowly, lovingly, the body is placed into the ground. Healing begins. Friends, family, community, gently lower the earth. Healing. But there is always a scar, a gravestone. The person is not forgotten. The earth itself tears kriya. What a beautiful idea. We think that burial is for the dead, and that's true. We're going to talk about it. But it's also for us. Healthy societies need the presence of the dead. Young people today look at life very often like a snapshot. What's happening today? What's happening today? It's not a snapshot. We're in the middle of a movie. I was born in the middle of it, and I'm going to end in the middle of it. And I received from the people before me, and I have to give on. And having cemeteries connects us to that, reminds us of our mortality, our place in history, our connection to the Jewish community. Healthy societies need the presence of the dead. The modern idea of what they call the toilet bowl assumption. What does that mean? The toilet, you just flush, get away. I don't want to deal with it. Make a call, get it fast, quick. No, do it right. This is healthy. There's an interesting idea. That's the number 2 reason. First thing, our religion, our heritage. Second thing that healthy societies need the presence of the dead. Terran Kriya. Third thing, if you were to make two maps of the world, map number one, a map of monotheistic belief, where people believe in one God, versus where people believe in no gods or many gods, atheism, post-Christian Europe, or the Far East, whatever you want to do. And the other map you were to make would be about burial and cremation rates. Those two maps have an incredibly close overlap, meaning historically and today, where you find belief in one God, you find high burial rates. Where you find belief in no God or many gods, you find high cremation rates. By the way, prime example, India, many gods, cremation, Far East. Judaism, obviously. Islam got it from us. Christianity, by the way, for 1,500 years, Catholic Church outlawed. It's only recent years, secularization of Europe, that the Catholic Church has changed. Even in America, by the way, Bible Belt has far less cremation than the coasts, the secular coasts of New York and in California. So it's fascinating that intuitively, people who connect to the idea of one God generally choose burial. Exceptions to every rule, but the rule is very strong. Why is that? There's a lot of literature on the subject. We don't have time to get into it. But I will share what I think. The Bible says, the Torah says at the beginning, that every human being is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. You don't mess with that image. Now, God is not physical. There's no physical, but it means that our body, there's something divine about this image. And you don't burn it. You lay it gently. You ever hear the phrase, we bury treasure, we burn the garbage? Wow, think about it. When your pet dog died when you were 6 years old, and you're crying and you go to your parents, I'm sure that your mom didn't say, okay, honey, you pick up Spot, I'll get the barbecue going. I mean, you didn't do that. We don't burn things we love. You gently bury them. We bury treasure. Monotheists sense it. We sense it. There's something special there about the human body. Deal with it gently. Don't try. Some religions, some societies, some philosophies want to speed up the process, right? That's cremation, get it over with, toilet bowl assumption, get rid of it, no funeral service, quick, boom, boom, boom. Other societies want to delay the process. That's going to be embalming and metal caskets. And Judaism says, just after a lifetime of being in control, just accept God's will. Let it be. Lay it down to decompose naturally in the ground. Two other main reasons I want to talk about, and then we'll get to some time for questions and comments. God forbid, rabbis, this is just an example. God forbid, there is a fire in the Chabad house, and you want to risk your life to save the Torah scrolls. Should you do it? Thumbs up. You're going to risk your life to save the Torah scrolls. Thumbs down, you're not. Ladies and gentlemen, wow, I see some heroes, thumbs up. I see some thumbs down, right? I see some going back and forth. Sherry saying no. Anybody else? Anybody else? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Who else? Okay, I see very good. Fred saying thumbs down. So good, you guys got it. Meaning, if there's no risk to you, the firemen say, yeah, we took care of it. It's just some smoke now. You can go in. Then, of course, go in and save the Torah scrolls. They're the holiest objects we have. But to risk yourself? No. Ladies and gentlemen, what do we do with a Torah scroll that is beyond repair? We bury it. If you can fix it, fix it. But if you can't, bury it. Well, you and I, it doesn't matter whether you're a rabbi, you're a layperson, you're a man, you're a woman, you're old, you're young, you're observant, you're less observant, you're not observant, you know, you don't know, doesn't matter. Each of us is holier than a Torah scroll, divine image. And you bury a Torah scroll, all the more so you bury a human being, and you don't risk your life to save a Torah scroll. Isn't that amazing? One final idea. I'll say it like this. Raise your hand if you have ever visited a Jewish convent or a Jewish monastery. Raise your hand. Gee, no hands are being raised. I wonder why that is. It was a trick question, guys. Relax. You're supposed to be, it's 3 a.m. here, not for you. You should have gotten that. Because there are no Jewish monasteries or convents. Doesn't exist, never has. Why? What, you think that people in the Far East are stupid? You think Catholics are stupid? Of course they're not. They're intelligent people. It's a different philosophy. They have a belief system that we disagree with. Their belief system is, if you want to be spiritual, you want to go high, then you have to ignore the physical. Sleep on the floor. Don't eat good food. Certainly don't engage in intimacy, get married and have kids. Physical world is bad. Life is suffering is the famous phrase. So the body is bad. Not surprising that they'll burn it. That's not our view. God is a good God that created a good world. The physical world is good. We have to use it correctly. Rider on the horse, not horse on the rider. Don't be a hedonist. But I couldn't give charity, tzedakah, without my hand. I couldn't give a hug to a person who's down without my body. I couldn't have children. Physicality is good. So we value the body. Imagine a woman who gets up from Shiva and her beloved husband of 50 years and takes off her black dress, goes, takes a shower, puts on her red party dress, high heels, puts on makeup, and goes to the bars that night cruising for a new guy. Normal? Of course not. When you're a partner with someone for years and years and years, when you love that person, when you're together, you don't just move on so quickly. You don't treat that, you don't forget about it. The soul and the body are partners. The soul cares about its body, and it wants to be buried. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm basically towards the end, almost at the end of what I wanted to share. We're gonna have some time for questions and comments. Let's summarize for a few seconds. We started out by the reality that people don't want to talk about this subject. It's bad luck, it's taboo, it's gross. I understand that. It's not pleasant. I was never into it. I was always talking about why be Jewish, raising kids to love being Jewish, how to improve your marriage, how to be happy, all that kind of positive stuff. And it's only when I realized that this is a real issue today, and we need to talk about it. So for that reason, I want to thank you all for coming tonight and thank all the local Chabads for sponsoring. The first part of what we talked about, the first half, whatever, was that we went through the reasons that people choose cremation. Mobility issues, environmental issues, all the different reasons, and they really don't stand up. A little bit of research, they really don't stand up. They're not true, except for one. Cremation is usually cheaper, not always, but it's usually cheaper. So then we flipped it, and we said, okay, so why is it worth the extra money? And again, if somebody can't afford it, your Chabad Rabbi will figure out a way to do it cheaper. But why is it worth the extra money? So it's worth the extra money because it's part of our religion, part of our heritage, because monotheists naturally go towards it, because the body is important. We don't just burn it. It has a role to play somehow in the future, don't ask me. It's part of our community. We're in a movie, we're not in a snapshot. Healthy societies need the presence of the dead. And one last idea, and then we'll move on to questions and comments. I don't know where I got this from, but I have the following dynamic. I have the following monologue in my head, where an elderly gentleman is saying to his kids, and I'd ask you if there's one message that I could share with you tonight that you'll remember, it's this next one idea. So try and pay attention if you can. The guy is saying to his kids, listen, I may not have been the perfect Jew. I didn't have a strong Jewish education. You and I both know I didn't do that many Jewish things. But there's one thing that I want to make clear. I was born a Jew. I'm proud to be a Jew. And I want to die and be buried as Jews have done for almost 4,000 years. I want the Hebrew prayers said. I want the Kaddish. I want the rabbi to arrange the purification, the Tahara. I want the Hebrew letters on the bottom of the gravestone. I want it done right. Because on my final statement to planet Earth, I wanted to say, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but here was a proud Jew. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but that resonates with me strong. I want to thank you very much for coming. Thank you for listening. Rabbis, I don't know how we're going to do the questions, just I guess more chats or open up the thing. I will give you some sources actually before we go. There's a great website called peacefulreturn.org, Peaceful return.org. I'll type it into the chat. That has some of my material, some other people's material. It has English, Russian, Hebrew, I think. It has lots of info on the subject, and that's really a good source for you. As a formative video that we made, that was really great. And that's one. You can also talk to your local rabbis when you have questions. My book, for those who are interested, it's called Cremation and Burial: A Jewish View from Mosaica Press. Good to have on your table if you want to discuss it with people.
Is it available on Amazon?
It is available on Amazon, or the fastest way is simply to go to mosaicapress.com, and they'll ship it out immediately. That has all the stats and the stories.
If you don't mind, could you type the title of the book in the chat as well?
Just did it right now. Cremation or Burial is the book.
Okay.
Maybe let's go to some, should I just go to the chat and see if there's questions?
Yeah, we'll do the chat because when people say their questions, it's hard to understand.
Okay.
Let's do the chat.
So,
first of all, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. And name everybody. It was a great, great presentation. And we hope to have you again soon. We'll do this again, God willing,
Yes.
for another topic. Also, what you said twice or three times, I want to just reiterate, because we have been here for many years and this happens all the time. Anytime somebody that passes away and the issue is money, there are so many Jewish organizations that, reach out to any of your Chabad rabbis that will pick up the tabs and get a kosher Jewish burial. So that's very important to know. That's, I've been involved in many cases, as are all my colleagues, been involved in many cases, so that should never be a reason.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me go. I'm going to go through the chat and just choose some things that we haven't addressed. If I do